Patricia O'Connor and Frida Reba Darcy here. I am trying to waddle my way here in front of camera. I have set up a table with a few of my bonsai tools, my little bench. My head's probably cut off. I didn't really do a test shot. Anyway, I think the stars of the show are probably adequately framed up. I've got my big sun hat on, so I don't really know whether or not I'm in this or not. That, to me, is less important. We're looking at 4 little trees here that are shohin. These are shohin sized bonsais. They also are ponderosas, all of them. Now, this one, I know the species, the subspecies. These, I'm not as sure about. This one is the same subspecies as the big one behind me. They were both collected in the same area of Deadwood, South Dakota. They're both succulorums. Ponderosa succulorum. So they're in various stages of growing, and there are various reasons for that we're going to go into here, and I'm going to take a minute. These trees are a little out of reach. They're on a perch that they mostly like, and I can talk about that too. And but I just kind of reach in and water them, and I take a look, and I see this side. It looks really great. So when I reached through to grab this tree, I was surprised to see this much dead needles. Because I couldn't see it from where I was before. Not overly surprised, lightly surprised that they didn't stand out better from my visual look that was probably coming from more this direction. But then I've got these guys here too. Those are 3rd-year needles. We go through and we clean those up. The overall health of this guy is pretty good. This guy looks like it's got socked by heat. This guy looks like I go through and have been taking care of the 3rd-year needles as they come out because it's an easy access to me. I walk by it multiple times a day when I water this and other trees. So we'll just take this on a little tree by tree basis. Also, this is a good time to look overall at the work that we did on 10 Ponderosa pine seedlings that were ordered on Etsy, and they came to us fresh, lively, and beautiful, and I planted most of their plugs in an exposed way, which should give us some really cool exposed root work. It already is, and would make that look less like the plugs that they were, which were kind of plug shaped. You know, it's kind of like when you take ice cubes out of the ice tray, they're ice tray shaped. So this tree needs almost nothing. A couple of needles that have been bent in half and have died back, but otherwise are probably but are otherwise probably in pretty good shape. I'm not going to go do a lot of needle reduction on this. The idea is the straight up Ponderosa pine. The idea is if I want the needles on this guy to get shorter, I don't pluck needles, I don't reduce, I'll let it I feed it, take good care of it, do everything I can do to make it happy, make it back bud like crazy, and when it has made so many needles that the roots that fit in this spot can no longer contain or continue to make them that long, it will start making them shorter. A year of that, and then we go through and start cutting back our 1st-year long needles that are like 3rd-year needles and our 2nd-year needles and stuff, and that'll give us a few years of some show-worthy needles. But those are not really long because they are kind of in state, you know, kind of in step with its size. It's the scale to the size of a tree that would be about 10 inches tall, if not all folded up. And these fold as well as Japanese black pines in a lot of ways, and in some ways they are less tolerant to that. I have folded a tree to death with some bad wiring, and I think that's more likely to happen with a Ponderosa, excuse me, than it is a Japanese black pine. We've gotten away with almost murder on some of the Japanese black pines. Not so with the Ponderosas. If you break the bark on this guy, or if you put a crack in it or something, I would suggest you putty that up. Just a little word to the wise. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on that. I'm going to move this guy over here and create a little room for ourselves. We had a few really hot days. October tends to be like that for us, and it was what it. So during those hot spells, I can lose a tree or two. I can expect to see, and I've noticed that my older trees, this is probably not their first extreme heat spell. So it looks to me like they fare better. They'll have isolated heat damage on this part or that part. I'll lose little trees. If I have repotted one and wired and stalled one at the same setting because that made for a great show, and then 2 months later that thing is looking at 100-degree heat, that's where all three of those little things line up at once and the tree's out of here. Also, I've had trees that we lost in heat under none of those circumstances. I've had young trees in cups just sitting there hanging out, and every reason to believe that if somebody was going to go through a heat spell, but not necessarily. So during these heat spells, it's tended to be more of my younger stuff than older stuff, and it's also tended to be stuff that I've already maybe kind of pushed my luck on a little. If I've already, wired and installed in close proximity, or dare say on the same day or something, and maybe made a few steps to weaken the tree. If I've just repotted it in late in the game, and then turned around and had some enormous heat, that would also take that tree out. What I'm looking at on this guy, I rotated the table around so that hopefully y'all are looking at this guy. That's a pretty tree to me. It's also borderline for me. I'm not going to say it's underpotted. I'm going to say it's spot on. A lot of times I'll kind of overpot something a little. I guess I got that to learn yet. It's about time to do something with all of this hanging out, but not right yet. I'm just going to clean this guy up a little. What we're looking at here in the way of heat damage, I've got some needles back here, some that I've already taken out that were badly colored. This could be third year here, also in here. So they come out really easily. If I was having to tussle with them a little, if they were hard to pull out, then I would probably go back through and cut them rather than just yank on the tree. But they give up fairly easy. Now I've got some here that are burned on the ends, having removed quite a bit of those. I'll cut that off. There's no point in looking at that. There are things that needles recover from. If you've overwatered a pine and it starts to yellow, or you've underfed a pine and it starts to yellow, that means that it might have the resources on hand to photosynthesize as far as in the soil and stuff, but it's not for some reason. So that's overwatering stops it from photosynthesizing when maybe it would be getting enough light. So that's kind of like something, if you, once you take care of the overwatering, once it dries out one good time and then you get back on the right path, so to speak, they tend to green up really quickly. You know, the part where it starts photosynthesizing again is, it looks to me, happens pretty quickly once the part that kept it off balance there is taken care of. Once you back off that watering and let it dry out and then kind of reestablish a little bit of balance there, you'll see those needles green up quickly. Not so with stuff that you have physically damaged. Those needles that you bent in half like this and then spring back into shape and look perfect, and you look down and think no harm, no foul. A lot of times you broke the capillary structure in that, and it'll take however long it takes for that to show up. But where you bent that over like my knuckle just did, it broke. And it went right back into shape when you let go of it, but it still broke. And from there on, there'll be a line. What I'm cutting off here is heat damage. This guy was hanging out because of the way it's designed, the way it hangs out so far over its pot, kind of windswept. It was hanging out over the balcony rail, not touching it, but it was hanging out over it. And that's painted bright white. So this side of the tree was getting fairly good getting fairly good reflection from a piece of white painted wood. And that would explain why we're seeing a highly concentrated amount of heat damage on the bottom, but then also heat rises so that and on the top where it was more direct sun, right, the light bouncing off the white rail here is why I'm cutting off all these ends. And that was overhead up here, that looks a little toasted on the ends too. We'll put that off for a minute. Also, as stated earlier, I'm not going to do any bud selection or candle cutting or anything. This is Ponderosas are single flush, high elevation, long leaf pines. All right, Ponderosa scopulorum. This guy came from Deadwood, South Dakota. It is a Yamadori. I was looking at it from here and could see some third-year needles that looked like they needed to go. Once I grabbed it and pulled it over the cypress trees to get it close to see a good look, I've got a lot of heat damage. Here. I'll just get started on that. There's also some third-year needles, but mostly what we see here is dead buds, and the buds right next to them do not seem to be having the same issues that they are. I'm looking at I'm thinking cause and effect, and it's exactly what we've been talking about. I'm thinking this is a little bit more extreme look than this, right? We gotta take this guy and do that. All right, so this is a little bit more extreme burn, and that's a little less. Same deal. It's in the same location. Part of it is hanging out over reflective material that most of the time doesn't really hurt. It's been on super hot days. These are my guys that are most vulnerable. That's going to continue for about 10 or 15 minutes. When it starts, it doesn't stop for a minute. The balconies on the other end of the building are under construction. By the way, I have been concerned about when that would happen on my end. I'm not concerned about it right now. I've looked into it when they started on that end. When I moved into my apartment, this balcony was being, there was a piece of plywood right here. Couldn't go out on the balcony. This is the only window. This is the only window my apartment has was this, and it was half blocked off by a sheet of plywood. And they started this, and then COVID happened. So everybody, for a few months, just set down their hammers, walked away. And it took a minute for this balcony to get replaced. But while that was happening, they weren't doing the ones down there where all the construction noise is coming from now. They were done at some other time, and it wasn't their time, and now it is. But I think our platform and our balcony here is good to go for another 10 years or so. Unfortunately, this is going to be off and on noise-wise. It's a necessary evil. So that's just the way it goes. Taking this moment to turn this to camera. Taking this moment to remove all the little dead clusters of needles. I do see dead buds here as well, so I'll be removing those. But I'm also seeing the tree is responding. The tree is already also responding to those losses. So yeah. Move this around. So clean this out. I see. I left a piece of wire. I had already removed the wire from this. And the tip, this branch did okay. Everything's alive here. Everything is alive here. So farther back, it did fine. But right here on the end, it succumbed. Why, Pat? Why? Because I left it. That was the only place on this branch that had wire on it. I think the heat, and that wire was black, so it would have absorbed heat. It was aluminum wire, but it was black, colored, anodized aluminum wire. So I'm thinking that might have transferred heat over to the tip of that. You know, it doesn't. I don't have to have a cause and effect every time. Sometimes something dies, and I'm saying just cause. But it'd be good if we could learn from our mistakes or learn from our lessons. I still see green in that tip. I'll cut this tip back later. If it wants to bust out with something else, if it wants to join us here, it is more than welcome to. Meanwhile, these guys that I'm pulling older needles from, they're continuing to flush out stuff. This tree, this Ponderosa, got a special treatment for me. Hearing, as I've heard before, that Ponderosas will not necessarily thrive here, is the reason why I purchased 10. They were less than $10 a tree to the door. Way less. It was like $60 or something at the time to order 10 Ponderosas and have them delivered to the door. That was just a really, to me, a cheap experiment. Had all of these guys died in 2 or 3 months, I'd be like, oh darn, you know, my big Ponderosa, for which I have high hopes, and my little Ponderosa Yamadori, for which I absolutely love, are probably in more danger than I would have thought. So to me, that was an experiment. There is a caveat to that I may not have gotten spot on. They didn't know what subspecies these were. So I know that this is Scopulorum. I know the big one behind me is also Scopulorum. I know that because of where they were found. Where they were found, Scopulorum is the species du jour. I don't know about these, but these have, to my way of thinking, so far from what I've been able to see, growing these mountain trees on the coastal area, I haven't lost any more of these than I have the black pines beside them, which I know are especially well suited to here. Whenever I have a huge heat flare up, I'll lose a couple of Ponderosas, I'll lose a couple of black pines. If I break the rules and push my luck, I may lose a Ponderosa, or I may lose a Japanese black pines. Times in the past where I've pushed my luck and it's cost me a tree. My little black pine that I love called Frankenstein, that was too much. A Ponderosa show hen like this one that I replanted late in the year, and as soon as I unpotted it, it was a couple of weeks after I repotted it, and I got what I thought was the perfect pot a couple of weeks after I repotted it, and I thought, man, you just did that. Let's just go right back in there. We won't even mess with anything. But I flashed the whole root base, and I saw white roots forming, which means the tree had switched on immediately after I repotted it, which was just exactly like what you wanted it. And that tree definitely died. So I've had cause and effect problems with Ponderosas, but nothing I could say is because it's down in the Bay Area when it was supposed to be a mountain tree. That's not to say that there's not something to that. I do believe there's something to that. This tree, I put in my freezer with the door cracked open a couple of times this winter so that it would get some sub 27, 28 degree temperatures for 5 or 6 hours while I slept, and the alarm got off to get me to go to work. That would also cue me to take the Ponderosa out of the freezer and close the damn door before the power bill goes up. But then I would take it and put it down below in the refrigerator part and let that go from 26, 27, something like that, up to about 40. And then from there it would go out on the porch where we were in the mid 50s, and then from there we would go up into whatever our winter day temps were, and I would pick cold days to do that. And you can accumulate those hours, from what I've been told, to overwinter this tree properly so that it doesn't burn itself out and die. Now, I couldn't exactly do that with my large Ponderosa. So I loaded it up in the hatchback of a friend of mine's car, and we drove up to the top of northern California and put it in somebody else's garden where it would overwinter there in much colder temperatures. And while they were babysitting it, while they were overwintering the tree, and that's something that's kind of a known. If you don't if the tree doesn't get a certain amount of time in the cold, it will not shut down properly. And if it doesn't shut down, properly, the results of that are that the tree runs out of energy and just shuts down and dies. Maybe while things appeared to be going good, everything's growing, and then all of a sudden the tree just at that moment just stopped what it was doing and kind of sat down and died. That was the tree that ran all winter long because it didn't get the proper cold it required. It didn't have its hormone allocation act accordingly, and that causes it to burn out on stuff. So that's about all we're going to do. That guy, I think we've improved the overall. I cut the bud back. I saw cause and effect, what caused that. I do believe leaving that piece of wire on the end caused that tip, especially where it was, to be one of the hotter parts of the tree. And as luck would have it, that wire was anodized black so that it wouldn't show up, but that also meant that it was just sitting there soaking up heat like a hot skillet on the end of that branch. So it stands to reason to me that would be an issue. This is another one of those ponderosas. Out of reach, not quite out of sight, and certainly not out of mind. It's third-year needles. These are third-year needles. So you can tell they're third-year needles because they give up really easily. Sometimes needles that die for other reasons, like heat damage or whatever, they're still firmly attached. I guess maybe the analogy is needles grow like fingernails, and there comes a point where they grow out to a certain stage where they're just going to come out really easy. They're spent. They stop sealing themselves to whatever it is they're holding on to make sure they're in there. But sometimes if you lose a needle all at once, you lose it at a time in its life where it was thoroughly fastened, and its dying doesn't change that. So one way to know if you're just removing, third-year needles is they give up readily. If you're not having to tussle. Now, if you want to remove needles, and they're not necessarily spent, but it's just a matter of your decorating or your aesthetics or whatever. If you pull them, they're not a third-year needle. They're thriving, but they're coming out of the bottom, or they're doing something you don't want. So you're going to get rid of them. If you cut them, you might get a back bud there later, which is the same thing as saying you're giving yourself an option to probably cut that off again later. But who knows? You could have losses later, and so giving yourself that up. If you pull them, you're more likely to rip out the bud site with it. That's kind of the idea. If you want to see if you are picking off a needle that was destroyed from heat death, if you want to see another one come back, cut it instead of pull it. If you pull it, you run a higher risk of it not coming back. That's long story long. Okay. This guy just really didn't have anything to complain about. It just needed a little bit. It just needed a little bit of attention from Mom. This is a really good color for a Ponderosa. We do see a little bit of heat damage on the tips of these needles out here on the bottom, where again it would have been reflecting up. If you style a tree and show part of a tree to the sun where the sun hadn't shined before, what will happen? I mean, you know, if you leave your arm hanging out of the window while you're driving across country, what's going to happen? So the same here. If you've got a really good reflective surface, you can see burn on the bottom, even if it's not as much light as it's receiving on the top. Down here is not used to getting light, it's on the bottom. It's like where the sun never shines. And now all of a sudden it's getting this bounce. That can burn it. Also, wind can affect that too. They're not really known for having issues with wind. I mean, it's a South Dakota tree. Goodness knows it's going to see its share of wind. But if that deprives those tips of water, then that is still depriving those tips of something that helps them head off that heat. Also, the part where all of this heat came in October, and if we were in other places where ponderosas tend to thrive, they would be cold right now. They would be trying to work themselves towards, they would be trying really hard to work themselves towards winter hardiness. And when something is trying to get ready for winter hardiness, that is to also say that it's probably moving away from summer tolerance. So to turn around and sock it with that 90-degree heat whenever it was reaching for its fuzzy sweater is not necessarily the best. But this is a good time to do this. This is a little bird feather. This is a good time to do this. This is a good time to take stock on how our ponderosas are looking, and for the most part, they've been doing well. I would say my hit and miss ratio as far as the shenanigans I pull on trying to sap their energy versus how much they can take is comparable so far from what I've seen with Japanese black pines. I have lost some Yamadori ponderosas. Those were reason to pause, definitely, in both instances, to say, was it the weather? Was it the weather? Was it the climate? Was it everything you'd already been told? Yeah, probably some of that plays to it. In other words, from what I've been able to see, I can keep a ponderosa making a beautiful color, keep it growing and thriving and getting it to do what I want it to do. We're going to see how well that needle thing works out, but it seems like it takes a long time to get needles shorter that way. I think I like the idea of grafting other species onto these. Maybe a couple of them you just say it's a ponderosa. Maybe you should just stay ponderosa. If I can keep doing that freezer trick, we'll do that, and you can keep your needles, and I'll see how good I can get at making those smaller. But that's a show hen tree, so how small will those get believably small? That would be an interesting experiment unto itself. I'm cutting a needle that I can see is pretty heavily damaged. There's no real reason to cut needles. I see people cut needles as a way of exchanging energy in the tree. And while I'm not going to argue that probably does, there's better ways. So that's got us on the heat issues and our third year needles and ponderosas, whether or not you can put them in a freezer or not to overwinter. The idea was they get about 40 hours of right around freezing temperature without necessarily freezing the pot over. If you can give them that every winter, and you can accumulate it, it doesn't have to be all at once. So I would pick 8 hours here, 8 hours there, 8 hours here, 8 hours there, until we got 5 of those and called it enough. Seems to work. We're continuing this experiment. We'll let you know. Whereas I said something about this in the last video. I've got a huge ponderosa behind me. I don't think it's in the shot. I think it was chopped probably but it's behind me. It's a big Yamadori Ponderosa, and it has Japanese black pine grafted to it. That will do two things. One, if those grafts take and it starts to become more and more Japanese black pine in its foliage, it will be treated less and less like a Ponderosa. In other words, when that black pine stuff is the dominant, we will cut back to finally cut off all of the Ponderosa foliage. Then from then on, we go from a single flush, long leaf pine to a two flush, short needle pine. And it will be better acclimated to this area to where I will no longer have to overwinter the tree someplace farther up north where they have a colder climate. The roots of a Ponderosa are absolutely fine with Japanese black pine stock. They're very well versed in producing the volume of stuff that is needed to keep a Ponderosa happy. Because of its environment, the needles do some different tricks. Whereas Japanese black pines are microscopically, their texture of their needles silky smooth and all that, and really good color, but they also got holes in them like cheese, and water evaporates from their surface readily, and they transfer water from the roots to the stem to the needles and all the way out. These guys, they can go, I don't know when it's going to rain again, we're going to tick a lock on all this stuff, close up all of our pores, and we're going to hold on to our water like little water balloons. The roots can even pull a trick where they do that. But if you supply this tree with a foliage that actually moves water, and then as the grower you supply the water like you would a Japanese black pine, all of a sudden those two lock in step, and you find that you've got a very vigorous Japanese black pine with a history that is Yamadori Ponderosa from Deadwood, South Dakota. And that just ticks a lot of boxes. I'm not the biggest juniper growers. I don't have any junipers, but I remember once seeing a couple of bonsai masters talking about a tree that was taken from the mountains in Japan and saying that was the closest thing to a ready-made bonsai that they had ever seen as a Yamadori. And even then, they had grafted the entire tree with something that had silky, beautiful foliage, and it was going into the Kokofu show. So they were preparing this show for the big league. As far as that's concerned, here in just a few weeks, we're going to remove the paper on the grafts, the tape that's on those grafts, and expose them. I've already seen one that's thriving. I've already seen one or two that look like they're not. But I was also told not to worry about how they look. Don't go cutting anything off. Just remove the paper. Let things roll as they do. But having said that, I have seen at least one of those that that looks to be ready to come out of the tape and take over. So I think that gives us, I think that's a go. With that, I won't have to overwinter the tree anymore like it's a Ponderosa. We will let however many we have, 1, 2, whatever amount we have, we will let those run and just get vigorous and vigorous and vigorous. They should kind of give the Ponderosa foliage a run for their money. At first, the Ponderosa is going to favor the local grown stock, so to speak, but the Japanese black pine foliage is going to be way more vigorous. Love the water uptake that they're going to receive, and they're going to be like, yeah, no, love that. We're still thirsty. Bring us some more. That will just cause that stuff to take off and grow, and as it does, we'll start pruning back. A couple of years from now, I'm supposed to prune back. That timing might not be right. I've got it written down, but at some point here in our not too long future, I'm supposed to cut back 50% of that growth, and kind of keep that thing going as the Japanese pine growth moves forward. At some point when we do a repot, right now that thing is in a huge training pot. When we do a repot, I should probably have or be ready to remove the last of the Ponderosa foliage, or I shouldn't repot it until I'm ready to do that if that works out in that way. So that is the method for maintaining a Ponderosa in a place that's not necessarily on the top of a mountain, and also while at the same time making it a shorter needle species. Going with the freezer is a way to hopefully keep your tree from burning out. We did that this past winter. We're standing by now to see how that continues. My 10 seedlings, I still have most of those, over half by a couple. I lost one by bad wiring. You know, I just tried to do too much and I put a crack in it. And that's where I learned that if it would have been a black pine, I got away with that. Ponderosa, not so much. Don't be so grabby. But other than that, we have those heat spells, and they're not anymore. Now here's what I've been told as far as the climate. Not only does a Ponderosa pine, now this is for me in the Bay Area of California, really temperate climate. Not only does the Ponderosa pine not get the snow drift and all those times below zero that it would normally get, but also it has a very, very, very short summer, 4-month growing season. And during that time, you could also see some ludicrous heat. Remember, high elevation. It can get seriously hot up there. So I've been told that not only as the Ponderosa does it not get cold enough, but it doesn't get hot enough either. So that's something. That is something to consider, and that's something I'm keeping an eye on as well. We are speaking of the kokofu that I mentioned earlier. Today is the day where they are starting, I believe, just a few miles from here, the load-in for the Pacific Bonsai Expo. Oakland, it is in Oakland, California, and Oakland is a very interesting city. It has a cool history, and it has a lake in the middle of town, and it has a sidewalk. It's kind of an amoeba-shaped lake. Its little ends are skinny and it's long. And if you've got a couple of hours to kill and a need for exercise, you can just take a little sidewalk jaunt around the lake. But in that area, there, when I moved 15 years ago, I noticed this huge civic center looking building that was, kind of classical architecture, and it had huge column lights on both ends of a huge rectangle. And I was told that, I think at the time I was told that it was damaged from the major earthquake and hadn't, and that might not be cool. But yeah, I'm not used to the place being open. Not only is it open and it's full swing, and has been for a little while, and that's where the Pacific Bonsai Expo is going to be this year. Just a 10-minute walk from Lake Merritt, which also has a bonsai garden in itself, which is a fairly well-known garden. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to. I've got my tickets in hand, and today they're doing. I believe today is the day they start the load-in. Tomorrow, Friday, I have to go back into work. There's a banquet tomorrow night. That's probably gonna be all the heavy hitters. Our show doesn't just bring the United States. It sort of brings the who's who of bonsai. We're just so lucky, and to tell you what, to have this just fall you know, and this homegirl's lap like this is just such a stroke of luck on my part. Steve, I was hoping, Steve of Steve's Backyard Bonsai, I was hoping you could coordinate a visit with the family and see this, because it is really, really something. I know the one that it trades dates with happens closer out where you are every other year. So our bonsai show was 2 years ago, and now this year. And 2 years ago was the first one, and this is our second year. At first, I was concerned when it wasn't going to be at the same place, because that place was, I thought that place was beautiful. But this is bigger and older, and a cool, well, I don't know if it's older. This is bigger and also a cool part of the area history, and I really look forward. The shots from the inside before they started putting trees in there. It's a big old place. If they fill that up, it's going to be just absolutely. I just can tell you right off, it's going to be absolutely awesome. Like and subscribe if you guys haven't already. I will do some sort of walkthrough. I haven't coordinated anything yet. I'm just gonna fly by wire and see how this works. I'm going to do a walkthrough of this expo and show little parts of it. I don't think I'm going to be able to get any VIP access to it, you know, uncrowded, but I will at least focus in on key parts, and we'll do little 5-minute shows here and there. My major part is I see a lot of people barging through bonsai shows with their cameras and kind of acting like, you know, gangway. I'm a videographer, and everyone will be coming hoping to have a really nice experience. So my idea is to try to share that experience with as many people as possible, while staying the hell out of the way of the people who actually got in line, got dressed up, maybe flew across country. Anyway, yeah, I'll try to be staying out of everybody's way and enjoying the festivities, and I'm going to show with you every bit of it that I can. This is our once every 2 years moment to shine, and I'm really looking forward to it. It'll be interesting to see how many trees that I've seen before in local gardens in this show, but I would for sure expect to see some by some of the bigger heavy hitters in the United States, and some from the heavy hitters in Europe as well. This show attracts a lot of people. I appreciate you. Frida appreciates you, and thank you all so much for watching. Get out of here, but you knock stuff over and get out of here. Look at your this. They are taking stuff out of Patricia's line of fire.